Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this side event here at COP27 at the UNDP Pavilion. My name is Joanne Munda. I'm the Senior SDG Investment Advisor in the Africa Sustainable Finance Hub with UNDP. This side event is really showcasing some of the work that UNDP has been doing on trying to accelerate investments into the SDGs and particularly the NDCs. Over the past 3 or 4 years, UNDP has been increasing its efforts to work with new stakeholders, including the private sector, particularly to accelerate the flow of finance towards achieving the SDGs. And from our diagnostic, we really are trying to address two things. The first one is that the financial system as we know it is unsustainable. It is taking us in a direction that is unsustainable, and we need to make it more fit for purpose. And I think this is part of the conversation that's been happening here at the COP as well, even with the call for reforms of the MDBE systems and so on. The second thing that we're addressing is the fact that while everybody talks about an SDG financing gap, the issue is not so much that we don't have the money, it's just that it's flowing in the wrong direction or flowing towards the wrong kinds of investments. So it's really a matter of financial alignment as opposed to a financial gap. Within that context, UNDP has a number of tools that we are using. One of them is the Integrated National Financing Frameworks, where we are working with governments to have a whole of government perspective on financing their development plans. The second one, which is the theme and the topic of this event, is the SDG Investor Map. This is a market intelligence tool. It gathers data and information on investment opportunities that are aligned with national development plans and that align with national SDG priorities, and tries to articulate this in a language that is, that the private sector can understand and can engage on. Many of the maps are actually starting to showcase the opportunities, what we call investment opportunity areas, particularly in the green and blue economy. And a map is exactly what it says. It's a map. It's not necessarily the end destination. It shows you how to get there. So these maps are giving us data and market analysis. They are then being utilized to identify potential investment pipelines, and they're also being utilized to identify policy and regulatory reforms that will actually incentivize the private sector. So we have a number of countries that have done SDG investor maps, and in Africa, we've actually covered 20 countries, and we've got 3 of them today. I'd like to start off with a presentation, virtual presentation from our Mauritius government to tell us a little bit about how they have engaged on this tool with the SDG investor map and the areas that they will see investing for the future. If we can put on the Mauritius video, please, Louis. Thank you.
Greetings from Mauritius. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honor and privilege for us to be participating in this high-level investor meeting in the margin of the COP27. I would like to thank the UNDP for supporting and endorsing Mauritius in the preparation of the SDG Investor Map. Mauritius is a very competitive, diversified and broad-based economy. We started up as a monocrop economy, and today we have a number of economic sectors contributing to GDP. In 2019, we joined the League of High-Income Nations, and today we have a GDP per capita of $10,800 US. So we have come a long way from a monocrop economy to today becoming an distributed platform, a business center par excellence for the region, and an international financial center. To boost our growth, we have preferential market access to the world population of around 75%. And we have secured market access in India, in China, and also on the continent under the SADC and COMESA, as well as the AFCFTA. So Mauritius has also been recognized globally as a platform of choice for investment. We are number one in terms of ease of doing business. We are first in Africa in terms of the Global Competitiveness Index. We are first in Sub-Saharan Africa for Global Innovation Index. So all that to say that Mauritius today is a platform of choice for investor community. And we are the top 5 seeds recipients of FDI. Moving forward, we are today accompanying the government, Economic Development Board, which is the institution that has the mandate of attracting, promoting, and facilitating investment, trade, and ensuring that we have the formulation of strategic economic plan. And we are very much in a privileged position to foster the growth momentum of the country. We are looking today at how Mauritius can become a significant partner in the region, boosting trade, investment, and economic growth in a sustainable manner. The SDG Investor Map for Mauritius looks at 17 investment opportunity areas targeting 10 subsectors in 6 sectors of the Mauritian economy. We are impacting through the SDG roadmap in services, renewable resources and alternative energy, infrastructure, education, healthcare, and food and beverages. I would like to highlight that we have chosen for this presentation 3 different projects spanning into solar PV farms, in the biomass framework, and the reduction of utilization of water resources, and the better use and optimal use of water resources. So first, on the solar PV farms, we have showcased Mauritius as a destination where we embrace sustainable development. We have the ambition in Mauritius and government, and the EDB is supporting fully this initiative of graduating towards 60% of renewable energy sources by 2030. Today, the solar energy sector contributes to 5.1% of the energy mix, impacting more than around 50 megawatts of energy. And with the bamboo solar PV farm, which we are showcasing as an investment opportunity, we are looking at how Mauritius can participate fully and graduate to achieve that ambition of 60%. We are scaling up our renewable energy mix and ensuring that Mauritius participates fully in that. Second, we're looking at how Mauritius can contribute towards the biomass energy production. In fact, we are looking at how we contribute to solutions. How do we make sure that in the sugar sector we close the loop? We have today an important player, Convening, that has engaged in the setting up of a biomass-based power plant to increase production capacity of the current biomass energy and contribute to the phasing out of coal by diversifying organic sources of biomass, by full utilization of sugar fiber. The third element of the SDG roadmap which we have chosen is decentralized water treatment and supply system. In Mauritius, we are renowned for a country that has harnessed the opportunities in the ocean economy. We have a number of players that are involved in the production and processing of seafood products. The byproducts of the processing activities are being utilized fully to create an ecosystem where the wastewater, the effluent water arising from the seafood processing is being used to produce energy. So these are the 3 projects that we have under the investor SDG map. And I would say that in Mauritius we are fully committed goals of the sustainable development. We are embracing and in compliance with the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, and all across in the years that have gone by and also in the years in the future. We're looking at how we can consolidate the existing pillars by embracing sustainability, whether it is in agro-industry, in manufacturing, in fishing, in the hospitality sector, real estate, and financial services. In the emerging sectors, of course, we're looking at how we can fast-track projects in the new space. In the new sectors of biotechnology, research and development, we are making sure that Mauritius continues on the path of sustainability. We are also providing significant amount of incentives to encourage economic operators to get involved and participate in renewable energy, and that has sustainability as their core feature. Finally, I would like once again to thank the UNDP for the support in preparing the investment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to Mauritius and that great video. I think it's really important to note that, when we talk to investors about, some of the things that they see as challenges, it's really more a lack of understanding and knowledge, intimate knowledge of the investment landscape. You're looking at potential opportunities with rates of returns between 10 and 25%, in Mauritius, and that's not bad. So let me move on to Gabon. I'll come to you. There's a short video as well from Gabon, just so that you can see. What's important about Gabon is that they have been undergoing an integrated national financing framework that has really focused the whole country's efforts around green investments in Gabon. Please go ahead. It's in French with subtitles.
C'est ce qui nous a mené à mettre en œuvre le billet à la question de l'accueil international en ce qui concerne les îles. Comme nous avons qui a le fonds central du travail, avec la notion de niveau du travail, plus facile, plus orienté vers les attentes du secteur privé. Nous avons seul le Conseil de loi d'orientation d'investissement, clarifier les différents régimes d'investissement des institutions qui concourent à l'amélioration de l'investissement facteur de marque des affaires. C'est dans ce sens que, dans la situation de la transformation, le gouvernement qui a le master plan d'investissement de l'État prioritaire. Dans ce secteur, il y a des projets comme le premier qui consiste à mettre 60 000 hectares de terre pour exploiter permis miniers, placer le développement du cactus, pour permettre de réduire la forêt primaire pour s'orienter vers la forêt native. En matière du carbone, sa position semble encore en phase avec sa stratégie de développement durable. C'était la volonté des pays qui a orienté le développement du pays durable. Le deuxième projet dans l'économie verte, comme on dit l'économie bleue, c'est la valorisation des zones marines du Gabon ou des projets existants qui ont profité de pouvoir valoriser notre démarche du développement de l'infrastructure de Gabon et en matière d'énergie, plus les énergies électriques et gaz essentiellement. Un peu comment s'articule la politique de développement durable.
Okay, thank you for that. Apologies for some of the sound there. But good to hear from the government of Gabon. Without wasting any further time, I'd like to call upon Dr. Yofe Grant from Ghana, who is the CEO of the Ghana Investment Promotion Agency, and he will share with us a little bit of their experience working on investments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to be here. I think we're at very exciting times in the world, and there are lots of things happening. But I thought I'd start with a short video that just shows Ghana's development in harmony with nature. So you will see something pretty exciting that I hope would leave a good impression on your minds.
Class beaches and rainforest, also having wildlife in abundance. That is Ghana. On the top tourist destinations in sub-Saharan Africa, gradually becoming the end-of-year convergence point for tourists. Well, treatment is all walks of life, with some of the world's most historic forts, delectable cuisine, and unique festivals from its diverse cultures. Indeed, there is no dull moment when you visit Ghana. The country's ecotourism offering has seen expansion in recent years as some of its main ecotourism sites, Mulai National Park, Kaku National Park, Wabin Firma Monkey Sanctuary, continue to garner tourist attention. Ghana achieved significant progress in developing ecotourism tourists at some of its main nature reserves. After introducing the highly successful Year of campaign in 2018, Ghana cemented its place as a top travel and investment destination for Africans in the diaspora. Tourist locations all over the country are steadily being improved to meet international standards. Our mandates sites to acquire specific licenses and certification in order to operate.
So the theme of this is just to come grow in Ghana and grow with Ghana, and I think it's symbolic, and I keep saying that Ghana is a microcosmic example of Africa, and if you've never been to Africa, Ghana is Africa 101, and probably spearheading the new development. I mean, the Ghana story I call the story of the 3 O's. So I want you to focus on the 3 O's anytime you think about Ghana. The first O is opportunity. The second is openness and optimism. Of course, we are a country with significant mineral resources: gold, diamonds, timber, bauxite, iron ore, manganese, oil and gas, and more recently, lithium. And so we do have all these opportunities which need to be exploited for development. And I do concede that in these times when we are all very sensitive to climate change, there is the new order of seeing how Africa can leverage on these mineral deposits in a safe, should I say safe, comfortable way that it does not disrupt further climate, the global environment, and then affect climate change. Of course, we have a critical growing middle class, and Africa by 2030, you have more cities with over 1 million people than anywhere else in the world. And so you have a middle class growing significantly. And in Ghana, comparatively, you have available skilled and trainable labor. Now, openness. I mean, Ghana is known for its political stability and its love for democracy, as well as its, we have this affection for the law. So, in fact, a friend of mine joked that perhaps in Ghana, what you need are lawyers, because everything is about the law, the law, the law, the law. And so that in itself positions us as being attractive to objective investment, because then you want stability in your market. And then the last of all is that we are extremely optimistic. We are extremely optimistic on the agenda going forward. In West Africa, we are seen to be the most attractive. We're one of the fastest growing economies, actually from between 2017 to 21, and ranked number 1 in Africa in the global retail development. So 3 O's, please ensure that you remember. At the GIPC, our mission and vision is to make Ghana the preferred destination of choice for investing in Africa. But quite recently, even despite all the challenges, our president says we should make Ghana the best place to do business in Africa. So that requires quite a significant amount of reform and working with partners to ensure that the investor and the investee are on the same page, especially in these days of SDGs. And also to create an attractive incentive framework that will lead to investment regulation reform through research and stakeholder advisory. What this simply means is, before we would package and go to the investor. Now we go to the investor with an engagement and creating a relationship. What do you want to see in Ghana that will make it attractive for you to invest? But not just invest, to create a sustainable investment that goes on as a relationship from time to time. At GIPC, which is an office under the presidency, our mandate is to create an enhanced and transparent and responsive environment, and that's why I say we work more on the relationship than the opportunity, and to provide an attractive framework for investors and lead investment regulation reform through research and stakeholder advisory, as I did mention. So our core functions: we register investment projects. We don't license like in other countries. We register. So we do not have the issue of having to decide whether we want this investor or we don't want that investor. That is decided by the agencies, the regulatory agencies of the sectors, like the Minerals Commission for Resources, the Petroleum Commission for Petroleum. By the GIPC, we have an all-embracing philosophy. If he wants to come to Ghana, it may be for some specific reason that they'll come. And I'll tell you why it's important. It's important especially because of some of the work that we are doing with the UNDP Investor Roadmap, where as well, a lot of the private sector, I have an investment banking background, and I recognize that a lot of the private sector always saw the SDGs as something there for governments. But what the SDG Investor Roadmap does is to show that there are opportunities that you never thought could be also opportunities for private sector. And a lot of the work is showing good returns, very attractive returns. I mean, small companies, SMEs, but showing IRRs of 50% and above, and which the private sector would like to see. Now, we provide information on investment opportunities, we identify value added, and then we liaise with the different agencies in government. Of course, I mean, these are the ancillary bits that we do. So let me quickly run through what it is. So incentives, we do have a dynamic incentive process, and we are using a sort of guillotine process to do our reforms. We've worked significantly with the World Bank, and yesterday I had to sit through an EU presentation of an analysis of the GIPC Act to see how we can improve it and make it modern and ensure that it's attractive. And so these are some of the incentives that we have that are there. So on the SDG map, I mean, we organized 3 sector meetings and with over 850 participants to channel investment into these areas that we thought were attractive, but had not been exposed to the larger private sector. And I must concede, for a lot of these projects that we see, we realize that there is a lack of recognition that they are attractive, or that a private sector can engage. Now, I'll tell you something. Let me take 2 steps back. Ghana was the first country in the world to benchmark its SDGs to its budgetary process. Now, that was for a very good reason, because throughout my years as an investment banker and going to government, I realized that even the concept of SDGs differ depending on location. So if we talk of SDG in education, in Ghana, it's about access. If we talk about it in Norway or Finland, it's not about access. It's about improving, increasing value. You know, and if we look at them in one generic pot, then we would miss the plot. But being able to redefine and actually show opportunity in areas, in those to investors, opens their eyes also to the various opportunities available. In Ghana, we have prioritized the SDGs in 5 groups: economic development, social development, environmental infrastructure and human settlement development, governance, corruption and public accountability, and international affairs. And we keep saying that at the GIPC, the 2 most important SDGs to us SDG 1, which is poverty alleviation and reduction, and SDG 17, partnerships for linkages and trade. On the back of that, post the pandemic, we also came out with a program called the Ghana Cares Ubatampa program. It is Ghana Cares, which is COVID alleviation and revitalization of enterprises support program. We actually had an envelope for it to fund opportunities that will help us recover from the pandemic and then help us build back better. But of course, we all know what has happened subsequent to that. Now, just to show you some of the examples that we have embarked on those 5 groupings. Sustainable infrastructure, ensuring that we are now going to build sustainable cities and communities with clean energy in Ghana. I mean, energy, as we all know, is a very big issue today. The arguments are varied because Africa, which supplies about 12% of oil and gas on the in the world, in the view of climate change, has to have a new strategy of extracting hydrocarbons to fuel its economy. Not just hydrocarbons, but our mineral resources. And I believe that that calls for a bigger debate, which unfortunately has not been elevated to the state to which it is. Now, why is that important that that debate must happen? Today, Africa is 1.4 billion people. It has no less than 40% of the world's remaining mineral resources. It's a combined GDP of 3.4 trillion. In terms of land mass, 60% of the remaining arable land left in the world for agriculture is in Africa. 25% of the forest reserves are in Africa. But yet the argument and the conversations have always left out where the exact problem is, and that is Africa. But if you look at Africa's contribution to climate change, less than 4%. The Congo Basin alone could trap, carbon more than 8% of global, emissions. So the continent itself provides a certain buffer or stabilizing buffer for what is happening over there. I just thought I should say that. By 2050, Africa will be 1/4 of the world's population. Every 4th person will be there. And the demography is that 60% of that population will be under the age of 35. And it's important that that engagement is done on an equitable, mutually beneficial level. Because the feeling amongst many Africans is we are being asked to trap our resources for a problem that did not emanate from the continent. And I think it's important to just say that here. But this is not the platform for that. Let's talk about what we are doing here. Commercial farming is part of our priorities to tackle food security and unemployment. And of course, decent work and economic growth through job creation and agriculture for marginalized group. We have a number of agricultural policies, like the planting for food and jobs, for both security, and on the back of that is another layer, the one district, one factory policy to add value to our Greek products. Then, of course, healthcare. We came up with a policy called Agenda 111 to construct new hospitals, etc., to ensure access to care. And then, of course, technology and communication, which, of course, would enable us improve efficiency, but also would be a very good, structure for managing the agency cost of doing business. And I'm sure you all know what the agency cost I'm talking about. Corruption, etc., which add a lot of cost to doing business. So basically that's it. And of course, manufacturing. And I just talked about the one district, one factory policy. So the two areas that we thought we should speak about on the oops, I think I went too fast. Yes, the two sectors that I thought we should talk about, which we worked on with the UNDP, and is very exciting because it serves quite a number of purposes. But the geography is such that almost all nationwide, you can actually go into fish breeding with the Akosombo Lake and the Volta River and the many other rivers as opportunities that can house fish breeding. The development need, it's there. 10% of Ghanaians actually depend on fish, but our consumption is pretty low, so there's a huge opportunity. There are real serious development outcomes. Along the coastline, the main job there is fishing. But we can actually export that opportunity to the interior. As said, all the areas in Ghana can actually give you opportunities for fish breeding. Stakeholders, of course, nationwide. Quite recently, we have started implementing incentives in that area to enable a lot of people to go into fish farming in addition to others. What is the market size? Fishery is about 4.5% of GDP and 12% of agric. But we believe that there is great opportunity to improve that significantly. Returns are minimum IRR of 24%, very attractive to anybody, whether it's private sector or government. And we believe that this should be looked at as a medium-term project. Quite recently, I've engaged the Ministry of Fisheries, and they tell me the payback period that we estimated is a bit too long because they are seeing 4 years, 5 years, and there are quite a number of fish farms now in Ghana that is funded by FDI, and that is quite a lot of interest. Some of the investors, of course, there are a number of international finance institutions that have financed companies like Agricare, Ghana Agro Foods, Ranan Fish, Maleka Farms, West African Fish, and all these are partnerships between Ghanaians and foreign direct investment. The other is affordable irrigation systems and dams. And Ghana, significantly, is about, just like in Africa, is just like Africa, is 60% agricultural land. 60% of our land is agricultural. Oh no, I think what done is there's a timer on it, so it tells me to hurry up. Now the business model. I'll just skip that and then talk about what it is. Because 60% of our land mass is agricultural, and our irrigation is less than 10%, there's a real need for irrigating and improving year-round production, because irrigation can afford farmers, and about 55% of our population is engaged somehow in agriculture, somewhere along the value chain. If we're able to improve production to all year round instead of relying on God and the seasons, we believe that we can create a much more sustainable economy. And recently, with the Planting for Food and Jobs policy, which was also based on some of the observations from the SDG roadmap, we've seen Ghana move from being a net importer of certain grains to now be a net exporter of those grains. But it needs a lot more than that. I mean, you all understand the agri value chains. You need cold storage, you need reefers, you need silos, you need roads, you need access to markets, etc. But what it does, what we did with UNDP, definitely does expose a significant opportunity to, guess what? Today I'm a farmer. Yeah. I mean, after we went through it, I just said, oh, okay, if there's land, why don't I try farming? My first trial was 40 acres of maize, which was extremely successful and extremely profitable. And I said, wait a minute, maybe I should do 100 acres. And so I've expanded to 100 acres, and I'm doing another additional 40 acres of coconut. And an investor came over and says, you know what, I can even give you a better plan. Acquire 100 acres and just plant trees. And once those trees are 3 feet, I'll buy them off you. Reason being that they can be a very good, should I say, foundations of building a carbon credit market by just building trees and then doing good whilst also doing agriculture. And I thought that just for us to understand that, yes, these are very great opportunities, but there are still challenges. Misaligned incentives to market participants, and that is why we are having now to realign some of the observations we made and create the necessary incentive structure. And then, of course, the biggest challenge is lack of knowledge by the corporates and the investors themselves. Because when they come in Africa, significantly, almost all FDI has been into resource extraction. But there are opportunities that are just as lucrative, if not more. that actually also serve a purpose of development. And so that's, those things are very important. The fact that there's corporate disclosure, and of course, not just of the knowledge, but of environmental, social, and governance performance are critical. I just put a bit of our SDG investment needs, but I'll not focus on that. I think we can have a better conversation, but we expect that we should be able to plug that big hole of $43 billion annually. It's a big ask, very, very big ask, which is 52% of GDP. But because we have benchmarked our budget to SDGs, it stands to reason that this is possible to do. Secondly, private investment is critical. And so we are out there at GIPC, when we go out to speak to investors, we speak to them about SDGs and the importance of SDGs. For me, my ask today is creating awareness for greater sustainable financing, encourage the dialogue like I've started here on resource traps, and then of course strengthening public-private partnerships through Ghana's SDG roadmaps. So I think we have taken a 360 view, but government itself has its own action plan for climate change, which is here. I will not go through it because of time, but the presentation is available if you need any more detail that you can find it. But just to let you be aware that we do have a climate action plan that goes alongside with the SDG Investor Roadmap. And thank you very much for listening. So any questions that you want, I'm available.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yofi Grant. I mean, I think it's really important to highlight... Oh, Mr., not Doctor. It's still Mr. Thank you so much. I think it's important what you've highlighted here, the fact that actually the investor map identifies investment opportunities that align very closely with your climate action plan. And a lot of the discussions that we've been having at COP and before COP is how are we going to finance our NDCs? And so a lot of this is about how to actually make some practical interventions at a country level and to get partnerships going in order to achieve that goal. So thank you so much. If there are any questions, we do have time with Mr. Yofi during the session. But just to keep us moving a little bit, I am joined here this morning by an excellent panel of speakers who are part of the ecosystem of accelerating investments into the SDGs and particularly across the NDCs. I'd like to call upon Ms. Caroline Verle, who is the Senior Policy Advisor, Sustainable Finance from the Swiss State Secretariat for International Finance. Thank you very much, Caroline. I'll let you introduce a bit more of yourself a little bit once we get into the conversation. Mr. Gareth Phillips, who is the climate and environmental finance expert, specializing in adaptation, mitigation, forestry, and land use at the Africa Development Bank. We also have online Mr. Ismail Ersahin, who is the executive director of the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies, WIPA. Is Ismail online? We can have him on the screen. We also have Ms. Tanya Dos Santos. Hi, Ishmael, it's good to see you. We'll come back to you just now. Tanya Dos Santos, you're the Global Head of Sustainability and Investec Rhino Lifeline at Investec. So very nice to meet you too. And finally, last but not least, Dr., not Mr., Dr. Mao Amis, who is the founder and executive director of the Africa Center for a Green Economy. So this panel, really important, and thank you so much for your time, your engagement with us here in UNDP, and sharing with us some of your reflections. You've seen the presentations from the various countries, gotten a sense of the kind of data and the information we are generating around investments for the SDGs and particularly for green transitions and green economy. I'd like to start maybe with Caroline here with a quick question for you. I know that you support the, sorry, there's a mic for you. Yeah. I know you support the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, and UNDP is a secretariat to that. But the group aims to mobilize sustainable finance as a way of ensuring that global growth is sustainable and stable. So how do you see such policy discussions trickling down to the country level? And do you expect particularly African countries being able to access more funding from wealthier countries supporting their transitions as a result of some of the conversations coming out of the G20 dialogues? Yeah.
Many thanks. First of all, I wanted to start off, so the demand for sustainable investment is there and is growing. So there's really a great interest in investors in actually doing something good and having an impact. So I think it's what they need is more guidance, maybe more transparency and more comparability on what they can achieve through their investments. So this is where Switzerland is actually, what Switzerland is working on. For example, we are launching Swiss climate scores that are helping investors better understand the climate alignment of their financial products or portfolios by looking at the emissions intensity of their portfolio, but also maybe the engagement aspect linked to portfolios managers. So what is the portfolio manager's engagement strategy? So all these indicators are useful for investors to better understand what strategy they want to have. Do they want to invest already in green firms, or do they want to accompany, help firms transition over time, so invest maybe in higher emitting industries, and then over time engage with the companies so that they are really committed to reducing their emissions. So that's one first aspect. I think that's a way, in a way, it's about moving away for this concept of ESG integration, where there's not a lot of clarity around these ESG ratings. And the second aspect that is gaining importance is that investors want really to have an impact, and this impact can actually usually is impact investment has been reserved to certain type of investors. So it's usually institutional investors, philanthropies, family offices that are okay with taking bigger risks, or having maybe slightly their investment locked in for a while before returns come in. So it's probably and what we are currently looking at in Switzerland is whether there would be a need maybe to amend financial market law at some point to allow maybe a broader category of investors to consider impact investing. So to give them the choice of taking on this risk because they're convinced that they can have a bigger impact. As we have seen, the returns are there in many cases. So it's just about creating the appropriate conditions for these investments to come also from other sources that before weren't available. Yes, so that's also another important aspect. But I also wanted to mention that investors that want to have impact want also accountability, and they want really to see what impact they're having through good monitoring, through good disclosures. And I know that this is a field where a lot more needs to be done. I mean, I think everybody's working on enhancing climate-related disclosures. Switzerland is by introducing a mandate for TCFD disclosures for larger firms. But being able to track this progress will become important even, I think, in developing countries. And this is, we're totally aware that they will need some help. They will need a lot of capacity building to reach that point. But we, Switzerland, are also very involved in international initiatives to actually push for more capacity building, and also to help them to help increase the accessibility of data and comparability of data. So there are currently more and more initiatives, for example, the Net Zero Data Public Utility, that aim to actually compile climate-related data on a very comparable basis, and to provide really open access to this data to anybody. And we see it as a huge opportunity. We see it as needed both for developing countries but also for smaller SMEs, and it offers also great opportunities to fintechs, for example, who want to develop solutions for smaller firms to be able to disclose at low cost and in an easy way. And I think this is a major aspect. Yeah, maybe I'll stop here.
No, thank you so much. And I think your point that you raised there on disclosures is actually very important, because being able to articulate your actual impact is quite critical. And we're seeing that within the markets, just getting a common narrative around ESG reporting, or as you said, we're trying to move away from just ESG to more broader SDG reporting. Within UNDP, we've actually developed the SDG impact standards, which also help to articulate the impact story a little more concretely with some clear metrics. And you heard from Mr. Yofi that actually, getting clear metrics that make sense for your context is also very, very important, because he mentioned the fact that for education as an SDG outcome, different countries would rather measure different things. So that's a really a useful reflection from you. Thank you very much. Let me move to Dr. Mao. I'm jumping a little bit across the panel here. You run a Center of Excellence on Green Economy Transition in Africa. Can you tell us what support you provide to facilitate the green transition across the continent, and what role you see for the private sector to make this a reality? Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to interact in this panel. So the center I run is based in Cape Town in South Africa, but we work across the region, and we're essentially a think tank. And our primary goal, and as she has alluded to, is we really focus on collecting the evidence base so that investments are informed by data. Oftentimes a lot of decisions are made because of gut feeling, because of who you know, because of your own network. But we really want an evidence-based approach to decision making. So that's really our key issue. And then we also believe that there's a disjunct between the high-level discourse where a lot of the investment opportunities, resources are lying, with the actors on the ground, with where those resources are actually allocated. So we really try to track from a climate finance perspective, for example, these communities that are most impacted, how are resources flowing? How can we make resources to flow much more effectively? But even more importantly, how can we make the local actors on the ground to be prepared for these opportunities in terms of the transition? Like you're all aware, South Africa, for example, just signed the Just Energy Transition. And for those of you who know South Africa, it's one of the most unequal countries in the world. So there's a very high risk that those who have already been left behind by our existing economic model will be left behind with these new opportunities. So how do we prepare these actors to be more, to take advantage of these opportunities? So that's really where we're coming in. The work we're doing in South Africa, in places like Uganda, is really looking at the bottom-up approach, because we feel that there's a dearth of institutions that act as a bridge between what needs to happen on the ground and this high-level discourse. I often say that, we live in these communities. We went to school bare feet, we stayed hungry and so on, but we're also able to operate at this level. So there's no person better placed in terms of bridging these two gaps. And in terms of the private sector, I think that, every country is very case-specific. And yesterday I was attending the GCF evaluation session, and they were talking about experiences with the Commonwealth in Eswatini. Eswatini. I didn't know. Eswatini. And they're saying the specific approach of how they actually use to entice the public sector to be more engaging. So things like ensuring that you actually do a comprehensive mapping, because private sector is just not one private sector. They've got different interests and so on. So understanding who is playing within this space and what are the objectives, and then really tweaking engagement according to that particular private sector. I would like to stop here, not to hog the mic.
Excellent points, particularly around recognition that the private sector is very different. You have your large-scale corporations all the way down to your mom-and-pop shops who are private enterprises in their own rights with specific needs. And I think that's a really important point. Maybe let me go to Tanya, who can kind of talk to us a little bit. You are responsible for compiling and communicating the impact Investec has on the economy, our people, society, and environment. Can you please tell us a little bit about how Investec deploys capital, across the range of the different private sector players, and how you consider non-financial aspects, including your conservation efforts centered around the Investec Rhino Lifeline?
Wow, that's a very
quite
deep,
quite
quite
a
a
long
broad
question.
I'll start with the reporting ESG. So we're very fortunate. We already had sustainability embedded in our culture as an organization for a very long time. So we actually wrote our very first sustainability report in 2002. So we're I think on our 21st sustainability report. And before that, we obviously reported on social impacts because of our South African heritage. But 2002 was the first year that we actually included an environmental piece. So it was the first time that E and that P of planet came into reporting. And it's literally a paragraph that big. The report's about 20 pages, and the paragraph on environment is about that big. And 21 years later, we're on our third or fourth TCFD report, and I think it was 130 pages. So that is how much the disclosure has changed, over the last 21 years. Fortunately, we have grown with that disclosure. So we've been following the GRI, SASB, etc. for a long time. So it's easy if you're doing that to slowly incorporate new requirements. But if you're a small organization that wasn't focused on this, to suddenly be faced right now with all these disclosures, and it's only through disclosure that you're able to go and get the investment. You need to be able to show all that information, that we've seen, some of the countries show. We need to see that of our investing companies. So for us, it's quite hard to, screen them out because they don't have policies. So we would rather work with them. How can we work with our clients to ensure that they get those policies in place, to get those processes in place, so that they are ready for the financing when it's available. So I think I jumped around a little bit. The Rhino Lifeline part, it grew out of a passion for wildlife. Obviously, Africa and South Africa in particular is critical to preserving our biodiverse wildlife. And it was 2012 and the rhino poaching crisis was at its peak. And a lot of corporates were pulling together, making donations, to really respond to the crisis. And we felt that just making a big check to put our brand on the outside of a building is not impact. That's not real on the ground impact. So we developed our own project. And really the project is less about rhino, it's more about conservation and key species and about human-wildlife conflict, because that's the crux of the matter. We need to ensure that we are building our communities and building the communities around our rural communities, building that economy of wildlife so that they have access to water and energy, because if they don't have basic access, we're never going to make any progress. After they've got water and access to energy, they then have access to education. They have access to economic participation through skills development. So it's really understanding that full spectrum from, we've put water towers up in Bushbuckridge, looking at how can you get energy there. How do we stop, the burning of wood? Because not all species are suitable for burning. How do we stop the gas stoves? Because that's unhealthy. So it's a really holistic approach, but at the end of the day, our aim is through our businesses and through our philanthropy efforts to grow the economy by building economic participants. And if people are able to participate, then everyone will be better off, and that leads to that, take everyone along with you.
Very nice. Thank you so much. And I think it's good to see that you're thinking about the full ecosystem and also sort of downstream, upstream, your supplies change, your value chains, making sure that you're all moving in the same direction and that you're all passionate about the same outcomes and centering that around your sustainability reporting. That's really, really useful. Gareth, maybe let me come to you. Within the ADB, you have a number of instruments that you have that are used to mitigate the risks for private sector investments into the NDCs. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, and thanks for the great presentations and input from everybody. So we do have a number of instruments. I mean, as a development bank, our focus currently is on development with climate change impacts. And I think that over time we're going to see that changing, and we're going to become a climate bank that does development. So I think that will be a very interesting transition to watch. We currently have a commitment to invest 40% of our total lending in climate-related activities. We achieved 41% last year, and of that, 67%, or about $1.5 billion, was invested in adaptation activities, and the balance, about 880 million, in mitigation activities. Now, most of that is public funding, because that comes through our concessional window, the Africa Development Fund, and we're also opening a new window in that called the Climate Action Window, which will invest 100% in high-impact climate projects. But again, it will be mostly public sector projects or the public component of public-private. So as a result, many of our of those activities don't speak directly to the private sector. So we have a number of funds and international climate funds that we access to benefit the private sector. So some of the most successful that we've seen in the past under the climate investment funds, the Clean Technology Fund has mobilized, I think we've mobilized nearly $800 million from the CTF, and that is a very high leverage ratio, I think of around 1 to 17, pulling in large amounts of private sector finance. We have the CEFA, which is the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa. That has 3 pillars: green baseload, energy efficiency, and clean cooking. They've made a number of investments into conventional renewable energy projects, solar, battery, and so on. We've invested in the Spark Plus platform to support clean cooking, and a couple of funds that are looking at mobilizing resources for energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is very difficult to do because you tie up your assets, your money in energy efficient technologies in properties or assets that you don't necessarily own, and so it's a very difficult model to develop, and it needs more work to create an enabling environment, a legal environment that enables those activities to take place. We also have a new fund recently started called the Canada AFDB Climate Facility. The Canadian government lent us $100 million to lend on to public and private sector projects, and they must have a climate and gender component. And we've just started lending on that. We're just completing our first investment of $15 million in a road project in Nigeria. So that's quite exciting. We think there'll be more money coming from Canada if we can make good progress on that. That road project was a public sector, but the fund is open to private sector. Now, what all of these projects have in common is they all need to be co-financed by the bank in the first instance. None of our funds really take on individual projects that the bank is not already invested in. Because obviously to do that, it means you have to go through the whole approval process, and that burden falls on the fund. So, we don't have the resources in the fund to do that. So the key to access that money is to get into the bank's pipeline for bank-funded projects, either coming from the public or private sector windows, and then we can seek to enhance that lending. We can bring in more concessional funding from, I mentioned the Green Climate Fund, but also the Climate Investment Funds or these other instruments that we run. And that can bring additional concessionality, it can bring equity, guarantees, and so on, a wide range of instruments that can make those projects more attractive. We can take on first loss and so on to help the private sector get engaged. And then one more area I'll just quickly mention, the Africa Climate Change Fund. At the moment, it's a fund that's growing in size, about $25 million. It's going to grow very quickly now to about $33 or $34 million. It gives grants to public and private sector entities to help develop low-carbon climate resilient projects, pilot projects, creating an enabling environment, and so on. We've just expanded the scope of that from focusing on climate finance readiness now to embrace the objectives of the Glasgow Climate Pact, which of course covers much, much more than just climate finance readiness. Biodiversity desertification, so the Rhino Fund, would be of interest. Also the Global Methane Pledge, which is highly relevant, and a number of other areas. And we've also expanded that fund now to be able to give grants to the private sector. And it always puzzled me because previously, and a lot of funds don't give grants to the private sector, and yet we expect the private sector to come in and bring all this money. So we're not giving them the most help that they need. Of course, that's grants for non-profit-making activities, first of a kind, feasibility studies and so on. But for example, in the methane sector, we think it's a great opportunity to encourage the private sector to come and get involved in landfill gas and wastewater treatment and so on. So we'll be giving grants to those things. We'll have our fourth call for proposals for those projects probably will be opened in the second quarter next year. So that's something to watch out for. Let me pause there.
Thank you so much, and you covered quite a lot of ground there in your response, and a number of financing instruments. I particularly liked your point about how the bank will become a climate bank doing development, and I think that's really important, recognizing that we cannot keep moving forward without really thinking about transitioning all of our economies, and that's a crucial part of how we must change the way in which finance conceptualizes development even right from the beginning, and I think that's a critical point. I also picked up from you there the issue around the scale of the investments, right? I mean, I think this is something that's quite important. When we do the investor maps with government, there's a plethora of options, but getting the right investor for the right scale of investment and the right kind of investment is actually really important. And Dr. Mao, you mentioned something similar to this. I'm coming back to the green economy transition. Can you tell me a little bit, Dr. Mao, about the success stories that you see across the continent? Where are we seeing some progress, positive activity, both from an investor perspective and also from a community perspective? Thank you.
That's a very difficult question to respond to. And partly also because I try to stay away from success stories because, every context is different. So we cannot just punt, one solution and say, that's the way to go. But having said that, I think there are two things I would like to say, having observed across the continent, that there's been quite a lot of progress made in terms of increasing access to energy in many, many communities. If you look at South Africa, for example, the IPP, I'm talking about 2019, up to about $4 billion was raised in terms of the independent power producers. So significant amount, demonstrating that you can actually deploy large-scale solar to be transformative. And so there is an example that could be led in the rest of the continent of how that could be done. Because I believe, for example, from an energy access perspective, that we cannot still do away with the grid. Even though we know that 80% of the continent still do not have access to the grid, we do need a mix of both solutions, basically the grid and off-grid solutions, so that those who cannot get access to the grid must be on the off-grid solutions. Because I've seen in Uganda, for example, where even locations where there's a grid, oftentimes, the power lasts for only a couple of days, like a couple of hours in a day. So it's a small enterprise. You would not be able to run a suitable business. So I think that the renewable energy sector there's been some progress there. Unfortunately, like the previous speaker had alluded to, there are certain sectors that we think are still really completely do not get enough participation. And thinking about agriculture, for example, agriculture is the backbone of this country. And yesterday, in my session on food systems, I was saying that if we are really to ensure that finance flows to the ground, to where its impact is going to be needed most, we need to disrupt the system. We need to disrupt the financial system as we know. Because at the moment, unfortunately, I don't think the sectors like agriculture are served well. If you look at the GCA, for example, it can take up to about 4 years to develop a project pipeline to access climate finance. So there is something to be said about the system not functioning properly, that is not lending itself for other sectors like agriculture to accelerate investments in.
Thank you so much for those points. Ishmael, we have not forgotten you online. And thank you so much for making the time. Maybe let me come over to you. We had presentations from three of your member, agencies and centers earlier from, Mauritius, Gabon, and of course Ghana. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit, as the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies. I know that you support cooperation, sharing experiences, capacity building among investment promotion agencies worldwide. Can you tell us more about how the African IPAs support private sector investment towards the NDCs and the SDGs more broadly? Thank you. Oh, just a minute. I think you might be on mute. We cannot hear Ismail. Is there anything we can do from our side? Sorry, Ismail. Can we just give us a minute to... Can you try speaking again, maybe?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, now you're on.
You hear me?
Yes,
Great,
now we can.
Great. First of all, I wanted so badly to be there and introduce you, but it was impossible. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate, at least virtually, and it's a great pleasure. And investment promotion agencies are members. I mean, they are, of course, critical links between the private sector and the governments, and they play this important role. It's what it was called as bridges between the government and the private sector, but I don't think it's fair to them. They are more engines in between because they reflect the data from the ground directly from the business sector, and they are being the face of private sector face of the government while doing this. Free from all the traditional bureaucracy and everything, they're always being next to the investor and finding ways how to support them to make sure that their investments are taking place. And not just any investments, they are more and more targeting sustainable investments in what they're doing. This is what we see in our service as well. So they're not just promoting, they are making the life easier for us by attracting, facilitating FDI. And maybe more importantly, they are also providing advocacy. They are doing advocacy by providing this feedback from the ground to the policymakers to make sure that a more business-friendly investment environment is created all over the world. As I was saying, they are taking sustainability goals, SDGs, more and more into their agenda. And our survey results with the World Bank, with the ILO, reveals that IPA strategies are being influenced by SDGs and being more taken into account. On the other hand, OECD estimates that the annual gap to finance SDGs has increased to $4.2 trillion. So there's a need for an efficient player who we believe that are IPAs can play that critical role by effectively connecting the governments with the private sector, and also by increasing the focus on investments that support SDGs, and by strengthening their efforts to increase investor retention, expansion, and advocacy by supporting conductive policies for investments. So, and we believe that IPAs can do that role, can take that role to close the gap very efficiently. And actually they do. We saw this in this morning's presentations from Mauritius and Ghana. Mr. Yofi Grant, who is proudly a member of White Steering Committee and the regional directorship of Sub-Saharan Africa as well. But there are, of course, good examples from which we are benefiting a lot, just like we saw from Ghana and Mauritius this morning. But there are things that need to be underlined as well to make sure that these bodies, these partners, these critical institutions are being supported enough. Some of the IPs are not performing perfectly, just to understand, and they are either not politically or financially supported. And not all of them are enough targeting or can target enough quality FDI or SDG friendly investments. Not all of them are sometimes chosen as reliable partners by investors. Actually, we do believe that there's a win-win case They are well equipped with the effective tools and programs. They can provide best-in-class services for investors to make sure that SDG-friendly investments are taking place. When it comes to the programs and tools, let me stop here, and I'm going to continue in the next section.
Great, thank you so much. And actually, I think we should continue with you a little bit. UNDP, we're very proud to have made a partnership with WAIPA globally to partner together to try and support these engines of economic growth in the countries that you're working with. Many of our SDG investor maps in the different countries are actually being produced in partnership with the investment promotion agencies. And I just wondered, Ishmael, maybe you can continue your thoughts there in terms of some of the additional support that you think would be critical to try and support the investment promotion agencies in their functions, but also in making sure that we are identifying pipelines and realizing real private sector investment on the ground.
Joanne, WIPA is conducting a lot of capacity building programs with EIF, with ISDB, with UNCTAD, UNIDO, ILO, also experience sharing programs, and very closely working with the partners to make sure that the IPAs are in the global agenda. They are well supported by the respective governments and also by the global community and international organizations. And this should be done in close interaction with investors, because investors are at the center of anything that IPAs are doing. So if the investors are not enough informed about what the IPAs are providing them, actually what they are providing is a free of charge consultancy services on behalf of their governments, on behalf of their respective governments, and to make the life easier for them. If they are not aware of that, they are not going to take the chances. And we do know that only around 30% of the investors are working together with the IPAs. It's in our hands to increase that number, that percentage. And I'm so proud also to announce that we have recently entered into a partnership with the UNDP during our 26th World Investment Conference in Geneva with the signature of an MOU to make sure that the objective of course this partnership is in general to enable IPAs to effectively utilize, integrate key market intelligence generated from SDG investor maps. What I was saying, they need to be supported with the proper tools and programs. That's exactly what I was talking about. That tool, SDG Investor Map, I think is going to provide a great value for investment promotion agencies. Just was given examples in the morning by Mr. Grant as well. And this partnership can also create a systematic collaboration between IPAs to develop comprehensive data that ultimately lead to the advancement of SDGs and their sustainable economic growth. So this key tool is very useful for emerging countries. And it links, actually, more importantly, potential investors to the identified investment teams in those countries. It can have immense effect on the advancement of SDGs for that specific country. Therefore, I do believe that the NAV is inarguably a vital tool that will be of significance for African IPAs in attracting more and sustainable FDI. It will also be strengthening for sure their current climate finance standing. So we do support all of our members and all non-members IPAs as well to take the benefit of this one, and also the other programs and tools that WIPA is creating in collaboration and close partnership with its partners.
Thank you so much, Ismail. And I think, it will be important to continue to engage with your partners. I think over time, right across Africa, across the globe, actually, we'll have a common language around investment into the SDGs and to NDCs in particular. And just as a last round of conversation, Tanya, let me come to you. A lot of the panelists sitting here are actually involved in ecosystem support. But often we find that getting to the final investment deal is a challenge. We've heard from ADB about maybe the scale, about, perhaps some of the limitations in terms of the kind of financing instruments you might have. But at the same time, we're hearing across the markets that investors don't see a pipeline of investment-ready programs and projects. So maybe from your perspective as Investec, can you tell us a little bit about, what are the real issues that you come across, and how can we start to accelerate investments into SDGs and NDCs a little bit more proactively? Thank you.
Sure. So I think my perspective has been influenced somewhat from my participation in the UN Global Investors for Sustainable Development, which is where we worked, on some of these investor maps. We helped with the South African one because there was this view that there aren't bankable projects. And yet people were coming to us daily with, but, what about this project? What about that project? And as we delved a bit deeper, I started to actually understand what some of those challenges are. We have all these projects available. We have, a lot of the big pension funds and institutional fund managers. And then you've got a range of other financiers in between. So as a corporate bank, it's incredibly hard to come in and participate in some of these deals. The country risk seems to be one of the main issues. The political risk, the exchange risk, and that seems to be a constant theme. I experienced it last week. I met a great company, a great CEO. They are operating in Eswatini, the old Swaziland. They are taking the magnesium out of old abandoned asbestos mines. So one, they're cleaning up the mine. They're doing it in a completely carbon-free way. And at the end of the day, you have magnesium. That to me sounds like a win-win all around. Good for the climate, the financial fundamentals. And then when I took it to our financing team, they said, no, we don't look at Eswatini. And that's the end, door closed. So I think there's so many different variables that, and risk appetite. I think it's the risk appetites that are so different across so many different spectrums. That it's hard. We're saying that we can match. That matching is not happening, and it's incredibly hard to do. And one of the things you do need is, the multilateral development banks. They are playing such a critical role. The whole financial package for South Africa, for the JP, is based on the development banks and that grant funding and that concessional loans. That opens up for everyone else to then be able to come in and participate. So I'm really excited because I see these projects and see these amazing solutions that are coming through. Scale is an issue and initial financing is an issue. And how do we address those two aspects of this problem?
No, thank you so much. Some really interesting reflections. Let me pass to Mr. Grant here.
I definitely agree with you 100% that there are issues, and I've always posited that the traditional PE models are not very applicable to Africa for various reasons, which is mentioned. So what we are doing in Ghana is we are working with UNDP and the Ground Up project to do a fund of funds, a up to $500 million fund of funds, to be able to then go deeper down, because of course what you said is right. There's a whole, should I say, I don't even know what to call it, a whole graduation of appetites matched to sizes. And like we showed that the fish farm, you can make an IRR of 24%. That's the minimum you could make. But these are not exposed to the bigger pension funds and financiers who are looking for $200 million deal. And when they come to Africa, they say, oh, there's no absorptive capacity. We can't find deals. I mean, where can't you find deals in an underdeveloped market? It means you either haven't looked very well, or you have structures that obviate you from looking at those deals. And maybe that's where we have to crack that whole thing. And I think AFDB's efforts are going that direction. They're saying, okay, maybe there are different levels for different opportunities and different appetites.
Thank you so much. Would you like to respond a little bit to that, or shall I leave you for the final statements? Okay, I'll leave you for that. Maybe I should come to Caroline here, and you can tell us a little bit about how you're also contributing to broader financial instruments across the ecosystem.
Sure. So I can maybe mention also a few initiatives where Switzerland is involved, especially through the State Secretariat for Economic Cooperation. So we are a supporter of the SDG Impact Finance initiative that is meant exactly to catalyze seed money and also help also in the impact investments and catalyze more private sector financing. There's also similar initiatives like the Private Investment Development Group aimed also to catalyze more private sector financing in the sustainable infrastructure space. We also have the Swiss Investment Fund for Emerging Markets that is also very useful and very active also now in scaling up their financing with respect to climate. So there's plenty of initiatives. The aims, of course, is to get the private sector on board, to get more comfortable actually with carrying out the projects on the ground, and hopefully at one point be willing to scale up financing there. I also wanted to mention maybe as another point that is maybe hasn't been mentioned yet. It's the issue of carbon offsets, and I see great opportunities there also for Africa to be able to attract financing there, and especially with respect to carbon credits with corresponding adjustments, because having these corresponding adjustments, so having the authorities decide to give up the claim for their NDCs gives them some power also to direct the financial flows to really priority areas. And I think the SDG investor maps would be a great tool actually to set the priorities right, and not only to let projects happen in your country, which is still great, but really to have these priority areas covered. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious of our time, and the conversation is just starting to get even more exciting, actually. But I'm conscious of our time, and I'd like to get a few words from ADB just to kind of give a summative. We did a similar event together in the margins of the TICAD 8 conference this year. And, you know, really the partnerships that we are creating across all the different players here are quite critical. Mr. Grant earlier mentioned how one of the priority SDGs for Ghana in particular is around SDG 17, and it is about partnerships. A lot of this will have to be achieved through partnerships, and we've highlighted that already. Maybe, Gareth, you can give us a few summative thoughts before I conclude.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. And thank you for asking me to sort of provide a little bit of summary. So I think we had some really interesting presentations from the countries to start with. We heard from Mauritius and Gabon and Ghana about their opportunities and how they were mapping their activities, you know, to the SDGs. And I think that's incredibly important because we know that investors and, you know, the work that Caroline's doing, for example, to open up the way for investors to put more money into impact investing, they're going to want to choose the SDGs that they want to focus on. And I think having that transparency and the flexibility, the opportunity to choose the things that they want, because, you know, so much about impact is, you know, it means something when you can attach to it. And you know, so it just because maybe you've been on holiday somewhere and you've seen something, or your kids are enthusiastic about something, or something that your company produces or that you made money from in the past links to something, those can provide the incentives as to why you want to choose to invest in a particular country or a technology to address a particular SDG. And I think having that transparency is there, you know, to enable people to report back to their shareholders and stakeholders as to what it was that they invested in is going to be really nice. And I think that, you know, then the concept that you have with the SDGs as maps was really interesting. And you said that, you know, it's just a map to help you get from A to B, but you need to have the other tools that are there. And now that's where I think we've heard from, you know, from the work again that Caroline talked about the legal environment to enable investors to move more into this space. the Investec as an example of a a global institution that has come of age with your SDGs. Congratulations, you've made it to 21, and that's lovely to hear that. It was just a tiny little paragraph, and now it's 130 pages. It's tremendous to see how that has grown and become a really important part of your activities, and how that kind of guidance can help investors to navigate this map. And Mao talked about the number of small investors. Actually, I meant to say, and I didn't mention it, there are apparently 44 million micro, small and medium enterprises in sub-Saharan Africa. Can you imagine 44 million of them? And we need the investment promotion agencies to help link those institutions, those small organizations with government policy, and help them to find investors. It's incredibly important that we do that. And then we talked a little bit about the scale of investment. And this is one of the challenges we have at the African Development Bank, and all banks have this challenge. No banker wants to get out of bed for a deal less than $10 million. It's just the transaction costs just aren't interesting. And yet we've got all these micro, small and medium enterprises. We've got unbankable women and youth, who just want $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 to try to make their business work. And that's extremely challenging. And I think you said in your introduction, Joanne, that the financing infrastructure that we have doesn't address that need. We don't have the ability to provide small amounts of funding to large numbers of entities. And I didn't mention that we do have a couple of programs at the African Development Bank that we're working on that will help us address this issue. One of them is about creating national green banks or national climate change funds. And there's a really interesting example in Rwanda where they started with FNURWA, which was basically a grant-giving fund that is now transitioning to become a green bank, or the Rwanda Green Investment Facility, that will provide a wide range of financial instruments. So we want to replicate that, and we're creating the African Green Financial Facilities Fund that will actually help build capacity and then ultimately capitalize green windows, either in existing financing institutions or in new institutions, as we've seen created in Rwanda. And what's interesting about those institutions is that they can mobilize resources and lend in local currency, which is another critical issue, because the IRRs and the rates that we talked about are most likely in local currency. When you try to put that through a Forex model, it all goes pear-shaped. So being able to invest and take returns in local currency is critically important, and that helps us tap into diaspora, which are a huge source of finance. It's largely on top. Do you know Nigeria gets more money from its diaspora than it does from its oil and gas industry, which is incredible. All that money coming in that actually could be put to work through local financial institutions, then transferring the benefits to the families and so on. So I think lots of really interesting areas. Let me just mention very briefly, other instrument we have, the African Development Bank, is called the Adaptation Benefits Mechanism, which is about encouraging developed country actors, instead of buying emission reductions, or as well as in buying emission reductions, to also buy certified adaptation benefits from projects that focus on adaptation and delivering impacts that would speak directly to the SDGs. And through the Adaptation Benefits Mechanism, we'll link the SDGs to climate resilience and adaptation. And that, I think, can be a new financing instrument that can tap into a whole side of the sort of climate finance framework that hasn't really been utilized yet, this sort of this concept that we should contribute towards the costs of adaptation as well as mitigation. So I think lots of really interesting points to come out, and Kofi, I'm going to remember openness, optimism and opportunity for Ghana, and your lovely video and presentation. That was great. Well, I think I've probably said enough. I hope I've summed up and captured some of the main points. Thank you.
You've done an excellent job of it. Thank you so much, Gareth. And on that note, just a huge thank you to all of our panelists. Ishmael online, thank you so much for coming to share your perspectives. To all of you, exactly. And to just reflect on the importance of the work that we are all doing across the ecosystem of investment to the SDGs. And I think what's really important about an event like this is being able to convene different stakeholders and really not just have the conversation, but look forward to actual partnerships on the ground and potential work together going forward. So on that note, thank you so much to the audience that's online, the ones that were here, and for being here at the COP. I'm really hoping for some outcomes that are going to help us move this agenda forward. Again, thank you to all of the panelists, the speakers, and to the countries that made the contribution. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
It's same difference. But you know,